Yes, we are recording.
Oh, well, she stepped out to give her father some food.
Oh, okay. So, Penn, we have two phases. The first phase, there are more personal questions, and the second phase, it's more than questions about the system and about your political opinions, maybe. So, the first, do you want to see the questions also in the chat window? Okay.
No, not necessarily.
Okay. So, the first question would be, who are the political figures that you admire? And what do you admire them for?
Well, one of my political figures who's always been, since I was in my early 20s or late teens, is Ella Baker, who was involved in the civil rights movement, was first worked with King and others in SCLC, and then helped SNCC form and supported the students of SNCC. And I first learned about her when I was involved in the civil rights movement, and I always thought when I get to be her age, which I thought was old, and old meant over 40, so I never really paid attention to her age. I want to be like Ella Baker. And so what it meant to me was somebody who always kept their eyes on the long haul, the big picture, and always felt that how you treated individuals and how you treated people and how the young people were being helped along was the most important. So she at one point, because of that belief, sort of broke with King and SCLC and supported the young people. And later when I read a book by Margaret Ramsey about her life, turns out she was in her 50s. So I'm way older than Ella Baker was when I was thinking of her as this older woman. But after the election here in 2016, I suddenly realized that my skills and my ability to work with young people and hold the long haul and a long vision of things, having been involved with the first Poor People's Campaign and so forth, was going to be very helpful. So I've had my dream of sort of not on the scale of Ella Baker, but that kind of role. So she was one of the people. The other two people are probably, or they're actually about three people, but one of whom you know, Wade, which David Hartsoe, and his good friend that I met through him and then became a good friend of mine was Bill Moyer. And then from Bill's friendship, I became friends with George Lakey. And all of them are people who are committed to building a nonviolent civil disobedient movement and take the long view of things, and have been helpful in really moving that idea along. And so I worked with Bill when he developed his movement action plan and did trainings with him. And I've used that work in the work that I'm doing. And in fact, in October of this year, George Lakey is coming, who's in his 80s now and lives in Philadelphia, is coming out to rural Pennsylvania to work with many various groups and appear at some of the college campuses to talk about social movement building. So I would say those people are the people that I've really looked towards, besides the usual Gandhi and King and et cetera.
Thank you. I just looked up Ella Baker. Ella Baker.
Ella Baker.
Yeah, thank you. The second question, it sounds similar, but it's a bit different. So, who are political figures that you once appreciated or maybe admired, but that disappointed you later on?
Okay. Well, I know that when let me see, I have to think about that a little bit. The two that come to mind are when Bill Clinton was elected, I thought, oh, maybe Bill Clinton's going to make a difference. And quite soon afterwards, I realized, no, that's not going to happen. And then when Obama, not that I thought Obama was so, Barack Obama was so radical, but I thought he would make a difference. And when he appointed his cabinet, and he had appointed the same people who had caused the economic problems already, I realized, no. So I don't know on a more personal level. I'm sure that I've been disappointed by people, but those are the two that come to mind. I tend not to put people on pedestals. I tend to see them as flawed human beings the way all of us are. And so I don't generally do that. In fact, in some ways, I've had the opposite experience of people who I didn't think were really going to come through, and in fact, when the pinch came, really did come through. So I don't know that's quite the answer, but that's what comes to my mind.
And who would be an example for that?
Years ago in San Francisco, there was a man on the Castro Street who was a gay activist, a gay male activist. And he was assassinated by Dan White, he became a supervisor after trying year after year to become a supervisor and to get into politics. And mainly his focus was on what was just and right. And he was a gay activist, really pushing for gay issues. But in fact, he really did a lot of good things. And what I really liked about him is he never gave up, no matter how many times he was defeated in elections before. He finally was elected because there were district elections, and he got elected from the Castro hate district in San Francisco, but with district elections. But he just stayed true to his outspoken and staying true to his beliefs and expanded his beliefs, used his understanding of gay oppression to understand larger oppressions rather than the other way around that sometimes happens. I think when I was in college, I joined up with a group that was working in Cleveland, and I went to some meetings that they were welfare rights mothers. I'm trying to sort of remember how I joined up with it, but anyhow, they were all Black women, and I don't know what they thought of who I was or why I was there. I almost never spoke, but I was learning, speaking truth to power at their knees. And there was a time when we went to an official who was going to speak to them. They were going to speak to him about welfare rights or whatever. And he came into the room, in his suit and his everything, and opened his mouth, and they started in on him. And by the time he started backing away, and I thought, that's what I want to learn, be able to do, speaking truth to power before he even started saying his gobbledygook, whatever he was going to be saying, nonsense that he was going to be saying. So, yeah, so I've seen people who really, I'm more aware of people rising to the occasion than the other way around.
Thank you. The third question is, which shifts of the system in the past made the biggest impression on you, positive or negative?
Could you say that again a bit louder?
Which shifts of the system where something really changed in some kind of direction or on another level? Which shift of the system made a big impression on you, or the biggest? And it could be very positive, or it could be very negative, big impression.
I would say that when I was in college, I graduated in 1970 from Oberlin College, and the summer before was I think it was 69 was when Stonewall, the gay rights action happened, and was the beginning, is credited with, in the United States, beginning of the gay rights movement. I went from being a college student who had no idea about gay rights or the issues of gays, or that I knew anybody was gay or anything like that, even though there were certain circumstances that happened that I should have known. I went from that to being on a bus not that long ago in New York City, and I'm an older woman, middle-aged woman, talking on the subway with a gay man who just refers very casual, and then I was from rural Pennsylvania. I shared that with him, and who just very casually says to me, "And my husband this and that." And I thought, that's not that long a time between when I first knew nothing to now, when this young man feels free enough to talk to a middle-aged rural resident in that way. And that was and I have been part of, I was part of the helping people for ACT UP in the AIDS movement and so forth. I was part of it. I've seen it. I spent some time in San Francisco identifying as a lesbian and so forth. So it's not like I've been far from it, but I've been really impressed with how quickly. I wish that the change in attitudes about gay issues would work the same, and I understand why they don't in this country, around racism and around climate issues, you name it. I wish that, and some of it I think is that people had enough sense people in the movement had enough sense to keep focused on moving things forward for the middle of the road people to be able to go along with things. So it was a strategic decision on how to move things forward. And I think some of it was probably luck. But that I would say that has really impressed me positively, of course.
Mm-hmm. The next question: which actions or omissions of yourself as a political person do you still regret?
Well, two. I'm just telling what comes to my mind. So these are the two that come to my mind. When I was in college, I had been very involved with anti-racism work. And right around that same time, I became involved with the women's movement. And through a variety of interchanges, some with women of color and some with white women, I got the message that you couldn't do both. It was an either or. You couldn't do anti-racism work and women's work. And I disagreed with that completely politically, but in terms of where I put my energies, I put my energies more towards the women's movement rather than, and I regret that. I regret that I didn't stay longer in the middle and say, no, that's wrong. We have to, and do the work of bringing them together as opposed to somehow feeling I had to make a choice. That's one regret that I have. I feel that I really, I don't know that I could have done anything, but I feel that I would not have that regret had I worked on that. The other one has to do with after the 60s in this country, I always say they got us out of the streets in the 60s. In the early 70s, they gave people in the inner city drugs, and they gave us middle-class white people 501c3s, which is the nonprofit status that you can then do political work in that. So they gave us one or the other. And I fell into the 501c3s without even questioning that one. The other one, the racism, feminism stuff, I questioned. This I didn't even question. And I early on helped fundraise and helped blah, 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 blah. I got very involved in that. And now I see that I wish I had not done that. I wish I wish I'd had the perspective to understand what they were doing and speak out. I know now, in the movements that I work with now, there are times that people start talking about getting a 501c3, and I always go, no. 501c3s, they tame you. They keep you busy with writing reports and getting your board members and do it. They do not go that direction. And I've on 3 different occasions in some rather large gatherings spoken out very distinctly for that, and didn't know, and I was always the oldest person there, so I didn't know that they thought, oh, this fuddy-duddy, she just doesn't want us to do it, or whatever they would think, But what I got was there were a number of young people who did the clicking, that they were in agreement. So I realized that there is a consciousness about that, and I was glad to say, I did it, I was there, I saw what happened, do not repeat this problem. So that one, I'm sorry that I did it, but at least now I'm trying to give a perspective on not doing it. I'd say those are the 2 that came to my mind when you asked the question.
Thank you. It's difficult not to jump in. So my last question is, on which political contributions of yourself are you a bit or rather proud of?
I would say that because my focus in all the work that I've done has always been on political and social movement building. Now that I live in this area, when I say political, everybody thinks I mean electoral politics, and I have never meant electoral politics. So I have to sort of explain, when I say political, I mean how to move things towards, how to move the arc of history towards justice. That's when I say political, that's what I mean. And I have always, so I've been able to have a rounded kind of education of everything from starting small nonprofits, working with small groups of people and building them larger, to working in varieties of communities, the Black community, the Latino community in particular, and the gay community in San Francisco around issues, and then coming to this rural area and working with the Poor People's Campaign when I was a child, in college, but then coming to this rural area and now being able to use a lot of that experience. So I would say that I am proud that I never really got pulled off course from the day that I decided at King's assassination, when King was assassinated. I think I mentioned this to you all. I took a day of retreat, and I realized if I want to have a society, the kind of society I want, I have to be doing the work. I can't expect other people to do it. And at that point, I decided not to go on in graduate school in comparative literature. And I also had not been allowed to go on, my parents not allowed to go on in international, to be a person in the State Department. I had to go to a school, liberal arts school. So that, all of those things meant that I never really got taken up in trying to climb the corporate ladder of any type. I've never made a lot of money because of that, but I've always been able to, and I think I'm most proud of that, because I think that then I have the skills now, well-rounded skills, to be able to play my part at this period of time in our country's history.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So these are my more personal questions, and I think Wade will now start with the other one.
Thanks.
Sure, that was great. Thank to both of you. So, Penn, what's your understanding of, quote, the system, unquote? What is the system?
System is built on hierarchies, all the hierarchies, all the isms that we know of, but it's also built on a hierarchy of people looking outside themselves and not at their own beliefs and staying true to their own feelings about things. And I think that's a very core, it's a very core process that allows people then to be taken over and taught that poverty is okay and racism is okay and you name it is okay. And I'm always trying to get people back to what's important to you. What do you feel you need to be doing? And whether it's somebody who says to me, which happened just recently, I don't want to run any more local electoral campaigns. This is a friend of mine who's run a lot of them. I want to do something with the arts. And he said, a number of people have been on my case. Oh, you have all these skills, you shouldn't do that. But I don't want to do electoral campaigns anymore. And I said, Chip, go for what you want. Forget what everybody else says. Go for what you want. So I feel like the system is based on making people look out externally and not internally, and trusting the external rather than the internal. And so all these hierarchies can be built on that. I don't know if that's a good enough answer, but that's my answer.
No, that's clear. Appreciate it. And you've already touched on it a bit, but how can we transform the system? Maybe elaborate some on the personal change you were describing. But are there also other ways that we can transform the system?
To me, I've sent you the stuff on self-care, which is just sort of scraping the surface of things that I feel that until we as human beings get back to really being in touch with our ability to be present rather than futurize or caught in the past, our ability to tune into what we truly believe and the strength to say those things, our ability to really face our demons and the things that tend to throw us off the track and get us to act in ways that we later are sorry we acted in. Or we should be sorry. Sometimes we're not because we're not even aware of them. But until we really deal with those things, I think that, and I'm not even talking about the general world, I'm talking about the movement world, is not going to go as far as we need it to go. I think that we in the movement today in this country, in this area, but I feel it's true in the whole country, and it may be true throughout the world. I can't speak to that. But in this country, in the United States, at this time, we are too much, the movement is too much focused against what we don't like, making fun of, the bully in the White House, et cetera, and not focused enough on how we treat each other, how we deal with our own internal problems and all those kinds of things. And it's one of the reasons I'm on this call with you all. I don't know how to get that to turn around. Every now and then I see somebody, a young person who I see as a true budding organizer. I just was on the phone with this man, Jay, recently, and on email contact, young man, took the training in nonviolent direct action, wants to be involved in getting George Lakey to come to his area, to his group. He lives somewhat of a distance from where I am here in a rural area, and wrote me and said, do you think George Lakey would speak to how we support each other and feed each other and how we can depend on each other? And I thought, oh, his mind is going in the right direction. He doesn't just want to know how do we build movements to, change things. He wants to know how do we build movements that include this aspect of movement building. So that I don't know if that's an answer, but that's my answer.
Yes, that's clear. I appreciate it. Thank you. In addition to those personal and social changes in terms of how we, especially activists, relate to one another, do you see the need? I mean, how do you see the need for institutional or structural or change or cultural change in the world at large? Or
Yes.
and if so, how do we need transformation in those areas?
Yes, I definitely do. I think that, oh gosh, there's so many ideas on this, but I think that one of the issues that we need to deal with is the fact that in this country, our political decisions have always been informed by our racism. And until we deal with the racism in a real way, we are not going to be able to undo the way the structures are set up in this country. I also believe that the way the Poor People's Campaign, the present day Poor People's Campaign, is at least theoretically going about things, which is empowering people who are poor, disenfranchised, who've been disempowered. Empowering them to take leadership is important. However, I did hear that when they did an action in, I forget what city it was, that the people there felt very much that they kind of came in sort of a la SCLC and did their thing and did not really deal with the local, so whether they really carry out what they say that their theory is about empowering the least powerful. I don't know. That was not a good report. But I do believe that we have to bring everybody along on this, not just those of us who are middle class and understand it and have been working politically for years. But we have to bring everybody along on this, and that includes Trump voters. And I don't mean the Trump voters who are following the Koch brothers. I mean the Trump voters who are out here living on the farms that I'm working with out here. We have to bring everybody along. I don't know if that's a answer, but.
Well, yes, I mean, it clarifies the kind of personal and social change that you recommend or advocate. In addition to that, do you have more to say about what kind of structural change or cultural change in the country at large you want to see?
Well, I would say, for instance, and I don't think that, I think that electoral change is important. And I would say the electoral candidate that I see speaking to these issues, which is the issue of money and how money is used, is Elizabeth Warren. I'm not advocating her campaign or anything, but I'm looking at the candidates and I look at them from the standpoint of who understands the role of money and what that has done in our country and who has the ability to change that. So I would say that until we deal with the issue of money, and that is tied tightly in with the issue of racism, until we deal with those two issues, we're not going to have structural change. We desperately need structural change. I am not a DSA, a Democratic Socialist Alliance person at all. But I believe in, in that way of looking at things. I believe in, socialism in that type of way. And I believe very much that we need to do the deep organizing that needs to be done, sort of along, I don't know if you're aware of the longtime union organizer, Jane McAlevey, but she's done a lot of really good work. And whenever I listen to her, I go, yep, that's what I believe. You know, she's very, very clear that we need to do deep organizing to change the ways that the power structure is in this country, not just elect somebody or change policies for 4 years, but the deep organizing that goes into doing that.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe you could say more and elaborate or be more explicit about why we need this kind of transformation.
Well, our country is set up in a way that is in many ways inhuman, against life, and against the continuation of the planet. I mean, everything is, you know, you call it the justice system. I would call it, you know, that's a misnomer. You call it, you know, the healthcare system. I would say that's a misnomer. So I think that until we are really able to get lots of people, I think a lot of people understand this. This goes back to the very first thing I said. I think a lot of people understand this on some gut level, but all the politics and all the talk and all the everything has kind of superseded that. So on some gut level, people know that putting children in cages on the border is not what we should be doing. But when you say, well, then come out against it, they say, yeah, but we have to have some kind of decent policy, immigration policy. And so when you look at that, you say, well, why are people leaving their countries? Why would you think somebody would leave your country, their country? If you were down there and your child was being, and you couldn't live, and would you? Well, yes, of course I would. So to me, the connection between what people understand on a real gut level and what their heads have been filled with, so that they come out saying, yes, but what about immigration policy? That we need to do the work to connect that somehow. I don't think that's an answer to your question, but.
Oh, yes, it gets there, but it would take a long time to,
yes.
to say everything. So tell us more about what you are doing to help transform the system.
Well, being out in rural Pennsylvania gives me plenty of opportunity to be in touch with where some of the basic changes need to happen. Right after the election, I did an interview project where I interviewed, which I've done for many, many things, both in Nicaragua and here, but the interview project I did right after the election was to interview people who I knew voted for Trump. And I asked them why. And so I began with the understanding that I sort of like what the Better Angels organization is doing, which is saying we are torn apart, we don't listen to each other, how can we start listening to each other? And so that's some of the work I do with the Saturday morning group that meets together and working across the divide, so to speak. The other piece of it is this area is very electorally organized. Lots of energy goes into the electoral process here. And the fact is that this has been a Republican area forever. It has always been Republican. I don't know all the reasons why, but it has been, and people vote their families, and they buy the lines that are put out by the Republican Party. And so to me, we need to be looking beyond getting a progressive representatives elected. We need to be, which is at this point, they're not going to get elected. I've worked on some of the campaigns slightly and canvassed for some and phone called, and I'm not against doing it because we have to change the dialogue out here. But my work has been, how do we across political lines, how do we get to the issues that are really bothering people, which is why I've been working a lot with the hub, which is pulling groups together that want to do a lot of work around whatever issue it might be, gun sense or health issues or women's issues, or Surge as a member of it, all these different groups. And I've also been working to try to pull people together to start looking at the fact that we're losing our local farms, because that's an issue that is that's a nonpartisan issue, because both parties are in the totally wrong place when it comes to the whole family farms, and this is nationally family farms. It's just affecting our area here. So I do those kinds of things, and I do the best that I can to really work on the personal is political, all the stuff that we were saying before. Try to get the movement to really look at those things, whether it's talking to groups, going out talking to groups, in the nonviolent direct action trainings that we've done, and in the work that I do with the trainers group. I'm always talking about these issues of bringing the personal in and dealing on a personal, deep organizing level.
Great. Well, thanks a lot for letting us pepper you with all these questions. And
thank you, Wade. Yeah. Now, what is going to be done with all this? We've done the three of us, right? Did you interview Bernard one time when I missed it?
Right. Do you want to stop the recording now, or have you already?